Your community pharmacy business is more important than you realize. Your employees rely on you. Your patients and customers rely on you. Your community relies on your pharmacy to provide healthcare services they trust because your reputation in the community has stood the test of time. In making a decision, it is important to consider not only your business's current needs, but its potential future aspirations. That's especially true as you consider how you plan to invest in your business over the next few years. Before you start shopping around for a financial partner, consider why you need one in the first place. Are you looking for specialized services such as investment help or a small business loan? Do you understand the amount of monthly cash flow you need? Has your pharmacy business even started yet? Choosing a lender who understands the business of pharmacy is crucial to selecting a true partner for your capital and financial needs. Contact First Financial Bank today and discover a totally different kind of bank who's ready to work with you to help your pharmacy thrive. First Financial's lending team is made up of pharmacists, pharmacy owners, and has a combined 75 years of experience in pharmacy. First Financial Bank. We understand the business of pharmacy. Find out more at ffb1.com.
Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we discuss topics related to sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacy in an effort to promote compliance and increase quality. The Pharmacy Inspection Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, delivering quality and meaningful conversations and discussions about our pharmacy industry and the critical role pharmacists play in our healthcare systems. Learn more at pharmacypodcast.com. Please welcome your hosts, Brian Prince and Seth DePasquale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast. So I'm going to dote a little bit on my co-host, Brian Prince, for a minute. It's totally relevant to today's topic, so, just hang in there with me. So Brian worked with Encore Scientific to develop their USP 800 compliant Clearview powder containment hood. And this is exclusively just through Encore Scientific only. It's a hood that's designed so that you can see through it from 360 degrees, all around it. Honestly, I just saw the blog post the other day when I was scrolling through LinkedIn, and it brought me to Encore Sci, and it, I got to thinking, I'm like, I remember Brian telling me that at one point he helped design a hood, but I didn't really know all the details about it. So I call him up and I'm like, hey, let's talk a little bit more about this hood thing that you helped design. I didn't realize it was this cool. So as we're talking and he's telling me more about, different compounding room design theories and that kind of stuff, and I'm thinking, actually, this would be a great podcast episode to kind of let people know some of these different compounding room design theories and talk about that right on the show. So in the blog, you go on to say that this isn't really a totally new concept or theory, but it's definitely underutilized. The idea of having a clear line of sight for the PIC. And the question is, how does the PIC keep up with what's going on inside the compounding room?
You're right, Seth. I have not invented a new or truly unique compounding design theory. But yeah, utilizing glass and windows, which is that clear view design theory, is not as common as you would think, especially, probably more so in the non-sterile compounding rooms that I visit, because utilizing glass in that clear view is really about checks and balances. A pharmacy with a compounding room has a lot of activity going on inside. I think we can all agree with that. And the pharmacist in charge is always busy running around the pharmacy, especially if you are the business owner. And Seth, I know you can certainly relate to that, is that you're always wearing different hats. It's accounts payable, accounts receivable, patient consults at the front counter, verifications, I've got to do those. And, you're always flipping these different hats around. So again, if the PIC is the pharmacy owner, then that person is incredibly busy. So really the visible design goal is to minimize the number of times that the PIC has to go in and out of the compounding room where chemicals are actively being handled and manipulated. By adding windows to the wall that separates the compounding room from the outside space really means that the PIC doesn't always have to don personal protective equipment, PPE for checks and verifications. I was at a pharmacy not too long ago, and the technician had to keep hollering over their shoulder to the pharmacist, who was also the owner, who was doing a patient consult, hey, weight check, because again, they weren't letting a software drive their process, and that's probably another conversation for another day. But the PIC, the pharmacist, was having to come back and forth, which is not a good utilization of time, and it's definitely not, lean process improvement. Again, probably another conversation for another day. But let's talk more about PPE. Consider the costs that are associated with USP 800 PPE requirements, with rear tying gowns, double shoe covers, hair bouffants, double gloves, and those are all disposable. So if the PIC has to consistently interject themselves into the hazardous drug handling room for constant checks and verifications, then the expenses associated with hazardous drug handling are also going to go up. And what are our top 3 concerns as business owners every day? I'll tell you, it's cash flow, cash flow, cash flow, right? That's what we have to think about these things. And PPE has real dollars associated with it. So collaboration between the PIC and that compounding staff, those technicians inside, can definitely be solved with utilizing glass and a clear view, maximizing the amount of visibility into that room. And then also there's the non-compounding personnel who may have to for some reason communicate with those folks, and that can be somewhat mimed or communicated through the glass as well. So visibility and communication, collaboration, a must. And again, let me kind of boil it back down. It's about checks and balances, and the PIC not always having to interject themselves inside of that room, incurring expenses.
Yeah, you said something before about wearing many hats. And, one of the things, obviously, being PIC, if you're in an operation that maybe doesn't have a whole quality control department, and you're also the quality control in a lot of ways, just to consistently be able to make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing the same way every single time, and being able to see that obviously is really important, because at the end of the day, it's you that's really ultimately responsible for all that, and you really have to have that clear line of sight is actually a really big part of all that. So I think that utilizing that clear view design would also probably allow for technicians to be able to see back at you and outside. And not only that, but I mean, even just to see the weather. So, we all know that natural light is just generally good for people's productivity. The more natural light that's in the space, the more productive people feel, the better they feel just in general. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Great point about natural light, because we definitely want more productive employees. And so, we should strongly considering that, numerous studies, and we've heard these, have all shown that employees that are exposed to natural light sources are more productive. And I think it's not one of those highly debated points. I know that there are light bulbs out there that certainly mimic natural light, and I always recommend replacing those old halogen bulb those long tube bulbs that we have to climb up on a ladder. We have to flip down that lid. It comes swinging down at us. And, also those lids, actually they're called diffusers, are so difficult to clean. And that's probably, let me kind of not sidebar there. But anyway, I always recommend taking out those old halogen bulbs and replacing them with LEDs, because the spectrum of light is definitely nicer with an LED. And an LED light fixture, especially surface mounted, is much more energy efficient and easier to clean. But natural light is definitely a good thing. So technicians also kind of deal with a depth perception issue, by and it's good for them to be able to see outside the compounding room. That's also good for the psyche as well. Sometimes I'll go into compounding pharmacies, especially again on the non-sterile side mostly, and there's 4 walls and they're surrounded by overhead cabinets all the way around 360 degrees, and it feels like a dungeon. We don't know if there's no natural light, so we don't know, is it raining outside, is it storming outside, what is really going on. And so not creating that dungeon is kind of important as well for people's psyche. So the more natural light that you can introduce into the compounding room will actually be less electrical light that you'll need to introduce. So if you combine natural light and energy efficient LED lighting, then operation costs could be decreased. And you'll notice that at various times throughout this conversation, I keep kind of going back to expenses because, I like talking about the business aspect. And I know for you pharmacy owners that are listening to this podcast, you're also genuinely concerned about your wallets as well. So let's talk about operational costs and minimizing those by utilizing more natural light, of course, whenever possible. Although not recommended, sometimes exterior glass is part of the compounding room, and I've had to deal with that in a couple of different design scenarios. And so let me offer up 2 cautions about exterior glass. First, you want to make sure that the exterior glass is a dual pane and has an energy efficient coating on it. Sometimes we call that low emissivity glass, or even a tinting to decrease the amount of heat gain that's coming into the compounding room, because glass naturally acts as a magnifier of heat. So the second caution is on exterior glass and even exterior walls. That's not good for sterile compounding rooms. Moisture and heat can transfer directly into ISO-rated environments. And so it's really not a good design theory to place a sterile ISO-rated compounding room anti or buffer against an exterior wall, especially with glass, because again, it could be difficult to control temperature and humidity requirements. And so, moving forward, and as of the time of this podcast, we haven't seen the new proposed revision yet of 797, but I think we're going to kind of wrench down a little bit tighter on those temperature and humidity requirements moving forward. So again, exterior glass and exterior walls, not necessarily good for sterile compounding rooms because of the heat transfer.
Bryan, I think there might be a little bit of confusion about materials of construction with both 800 and 797. Can you demystify what materials a compounding pharmacy should be using?
Yeah, so if you are thinking about redesigning your compounding lab for USP 800 compliance, or you're even considering building a brand new compounding lab because you feel like you need more space, or you want to take over a new piece of property, or whatever the case is, and you're definitely wondering about how to accomplish this more an open, clear view design. And really, there are 2 ways to accomplish this. Really, just 2: modular walls versus stick-built walls. And let me kind of explain that. First, let me tell you, USP 800, that chapter, it states, due to difficulty of cleaning HD contamination, surfaces of ceilings, walls, floors, fixtures, shelving, counters, and cabinets in the non-sterile compounding area must be smooth, impervious, free from cracks and crevices, and non-shedding. So we're familiar with that language in 797 because that's how we've always handled our sterile. At least I certainly hope that's how you're handling your sterile. And so now we got to carry over this same design theory into the non-sterile side as well, making sure that all the surfaces, the walls, the ceilings are non-shedding. So again, let's kind of talk about the two ways to accomplish this. Number one, modular walls offer all of those benefits right out of the box. However, modular walls are usually more expensive, but they will offer you quite a bit of flexibility for future expansion, being able to move the wall systems around. So if the dynamics of your situation or your labs change, you've kind of got that latitude to change those around. And you can even, if you decide to grow into another space, then you can kind of take them with you. Sounds simplistic for the most part, and with modular walls, it kind of is, although it does require some construction. Modular wall systems offer glass options that are, half view, 3/4 view, and even full view glass. Some of you've got clean rooms now where you've got that kind of extruded aluminum framing with all full view glass from ceiling to floor. So that's certainly a viable situation as well. So when discussing these options with modular wall and clean room companies, make sure that you emphasize minimal edges, because in my mind, sometimes those extruded aluminum products create a lot more edge. The more edges and ledges means the more surfaces that can potentially collect dust, as well as the more surfaces that you've got to clean. Now, let's talk about option number two. Option number two is StickBuilt walls, and they're typically less expensive and comprise of standard wood 2x4s, right? That we can buy down at Lowe's and Home Depot, just 2x4s. And gypsum is also known as drywall. The important finishing step, though, for the gypsum, for the drywall to be smooth and impervious, is to use epoxy paint on the walls. Make sure to research the epoxy paint and make sure it's compatible with your facility's cleaning chemicals. I have recently been recommending a Sherwin-Williams product that is a water-based pre-catalyzed product, and what that means is that it doesn't require mixing, because in years past, if you ever dealt with epoxy paint, you knew that it was a 2-part and sometimes 3-part process, and it smelled bad and it off-gassed, which means it created fumes for weeks on end. However, another consultant, a friend of mine, said, Bryan, said, listen, I'm concerned that 1-part product, that 1-part epoxy paint that you're recommending may not hold up to some of the chemicals that we've got out there that we're cleaning with. And it's a very valid point. I did call Sherwin-Williams actually and asked them about compatibility with simple cleaners, and they felt good with that. However, again, we really don't know what we don't know. So again, I would say probably, to be safe, stick with a 2-part epoxy wall paint to put on top of that gypsum. And so again, with gypsum, we get minimal edges. And then when we want to bring in the glass, you actually have to utilize a local glass company. So if you're stick framing the walls, you need to call a local glass company and let them know, hey, we want to maximize. We want some 6 feet long, 3 feet tall, or whatever you want to do, part of that design, to really open up and give that clear view appeal. However, your local glass companies are probably not used to dealing with the type of environments that we're talking about creating with minimal edges and minimal ledges. So you may have to kind of coach them through and let them know, listen, the framing component of the glass needs to be as minimal as possible, not bulky metal. And again, you can kind of coach them through that and talk through that with various options. In weeks previous, you've heard both Seth and I mention Encore Scientific, who invited us, the podcast, into their booth at Compounders on Capitol Hill a few weeks ago. And they have been a consistent sponsor of this podcast, so we're very appreciative of that relationship with Encore Scientific. I've actually been a consultant for Encore Scientific over the past year now, and so their pharmacy customers have a direct resource for USP 800 compliance and design related questions. During my partnership with those nice folks over there, I designed a 360-degree view powder hood that is USP 800 compliant, and it aligns with my design theory of creating clear view spaces. By designing a hood that is completely see-through, the pharmacy can actually push them up against the glass, whether that's modular or stick-built, without the PIC losing visibility. Encore Scientific's USP 800 compliant hood has a redundant HEPA filtration system, which will allow for recirculation of clean air back into the non-sterile compounding room. And I've had the honor of speaking at about a half a dozen or so compounding conferences this year, and I have always explained the benefits of redundant HEPA hoods and the long-term benefits for the future growth of your business and energy consumption. The hood's efficient motor, it's actually an ECM motor, which means it consumes a low voltage. It's not an energy hog. And when you combine that with the two 3-inch deep pleated HEPA filters, that equals longer filter life, less ongoing maintenance, and lower operating costs. So again, I'm talking to you pharmacy owners in your pocketbooks about the benefits of this hood that I've designed that is USP 800 compliant. And so I encourage you to call my friends over at Encore Scientific and discuss with them the details of this hood as it relates again to my design theory of clear visibility and the benefits of that whole design concept. You can reach Encore Scientific at 1-800-454-2304. And I appreciate you folks week in and week out just being here at the podcast, being part of our audience. Always feel free to send us feedback, send us questions, send us some topics, tell us what you want to hear. I recently had some conversations with some clients and like, Bryan, something I'd like to hear. And so we're lining up some of the conversations for the future so that we can meet your needs. So we encourage your feedback, and again, we appreciate you every single week. And until we meet again, keep raising the bar.